These skeletons from a ruined Crusader castle lay undisturbed for 800 years. Their scarred remains are testimony to the men who fell in a legendary battle. Cut down by a sword.
A very sharp break that's actually split the whole bone in two.
Struck by an arrow.
It must have been absolutely terrifying.
An entire garrison overwhelmed. Together, they reveal the human story of how Christ's warriors fought and died in a single day of intense combat that changed history. The Crusaders are back from the dead. Jacob's Ford, a Crusader castle that once towered over the River Jordan in Israel, now lies in ruins. Few details are known of its downfall in 1179. The best account comes from Muslim chronicles. They tell of an epic day of battle, in which Saladin's army triumphed over the Crusaders, the soldiers of the cross. Yet the account in the chronicles, though evocative, is incomplete. Little mention is made of the men who fought and died defending the castle. Then, archaeologists discovered something extraordinary. Within the castle ruins, they found the remains of the fallen Crusaders.
This is the exact place where we started finding all kinds of skeletons of human beings and of horses. We see the drama, the actual men that were killed during the battle. You can see the agony.
They are the first skeletons ever excavated of Crusaders who died in battle. They are a unique opportunity to understand what really happened to the defenders of Jacob's Ford. Forensic anthropologist Mick Wysocki, an expert on battle wounds, focuses on 6 of the skeletons. All are male, aged 18 to 40. Their names are lost forever, but each tells his own story.
This is an astonishing group of individuals. Many of them show signs of sharp force trauma and brutal injuries.
From the outset, one stands out.
This individual suffered the most appalling series of injuries. We can see this here in his lower jaw, his mandible, blow struck at an angle, probably splitting the chin in two. We know that it's a blow from a sword because the break is very, very straight and even.
A second wound severed his arm.
The cut is actually coming down at an angle through here and cutting through here. Also, in this photograph, we can see how clean and sharp it is. This isn't a natural break in bone at all. This is a cut. One blow, and the arm was gone.
These wounds are evidence of a focused attack on one man. Their ferocity is in itself a clue to his identity.
These injuries are typical of hand-to-hand combat. They're all to the front of the body. He wasn't running away, he was standing and fighting. So it looks as if he was very likely targeted. He might have been recognized as a very powerful warrior that had to be brought down at all costs.
The forensics suggest he was one of the most enigmatic of Crusaders. A Templar knight. According to the chronicles, the castle garrison was led by 80 of these holy warriors.
The Knights Templar are a group of warrior monks. They're people dedicated to the defense of the Holy Land. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But the crucial difference is They fight the devil with swords, while monks will fight the devil with prayer.
Templar Knights were men of noble birth, trained as warriors from as young as 12. They were the Crusaders' fighting elite. Their weapon of choice was the broadsword.
This weapon is an incredibly devastating weapon. It's a double-edged sword, which means that when you pick it up, you can use either edge, so very versatile. It's well balanced, so when we're fighting, we can move the sword rapidly. And as well as being a cutting sword, it's also equally a thrusting sword. The cut, or the thrust.
When the Muslims attacked Jacob's Ford, the Knights Templar led the defense. They believed dying for Christ would make them martyrs and guarantee them a place in heaven. Their unshakable devotion and hunger for battle made them formidable.
The Templars are the best troops the Christians have got. They're trained, they've got the best kit, they're disciplined. They have a remarkable reputation for courage.
If other knights were training hard, Templars would have been training twice as hard. The advance, the retreat, the pass. It's all about practice, practice, practice.
Despite his training, the Templar Knight's skeleton reveals he was overwhelmed. His jawbone was split in two.
The face is a particularly nasty area to be injured because there are so many nerve endings. Even a small cut is very painful.
His left arm cut clean off. The weapon responsible was most likely the Muslim's scimitar.
This is a real cleaving weapon, swinging through, cutting. With the curved blade, a smaller area of the blade hits home first, which means that all the force of the blow hits on that singular point, then it just widens the cut as it draws through. Now, this leg of lamb also has a bone running through it, and this is a pure example of the cleaving ability of the scimitar. Using the weight of the blade, I would easily remove his arm.
Driven by his faith, the knight fought on, aided by his body's response to serious injury.
If a soldier's on the battlefield and, for instance, he loses his arm, there's every reason to suppose that he can still continue fighting. Physiologically, the mechanism allowing them to do that is the adrenaline that's pumping around their body, constricting the blood vessels from the wound, reducing their concept of pain, pushing them on to fight.
The relentless attack on this one man continued. When his skeleton was excavated, an arrowhead was found lodged in his neck.
The main compromise of function would be the ability to breathe. That's one of the major killers on a battlefield, the loss of the airway.
Incredibly, none of these wounds was the cause of death. There was a fourth and final assault.
The blow that we think probably killed him is this blow that we can see to the front of his skull here. Very sharp break running through the bone here that's actually split the whole bone in two. And that's certainly a killing blow. It may well have been struck while he was already on his knees.
The Templar Knight's death was like an execution.
If the blow penetrated the brain, there'd be massive hemorrhage, and he would drop to the ground like a stone.
The Knight Templar died a martyr, his courage matched only by his fanaticism. But how the Muslim army stormed the castle and overwhelmed the rest of the garrison remains a mystery. The wounds inflicted on a Templar knight are the first forensic evidence of the human story played out inside Jacob's Ford. His death was the result of a fateful decision made a year earlier, in 1178. The Crusaders were then at the height of their power in the Holy Land. Their leader was Baldwin IV, the leper king of Jerusalem.
Baldwin IV was an incredible young man. He was king when he was only 13 years old, and by then he was suspected of having leprosy. And of course, tragically, it's extremely disfiguring. And yet, in spite of this painful, debilitating illness, he held on to the crown of Jerusalem.
Baldwin's most zealous troops, the Knights Templar, pressured him to build a super fortress on the edge of Muslim territory.
This is the place, Jacob's Ford.
It was a provocative act. From here, the Crusaders could attack the Muslim capital, Damascus, at will, a single day's march away. At great cost, the castle would be both imposing and impregnable, fortified by two huge circular walls.
The castle was intended to be big, bigger than any castle which was built in this part of the world and in Europe at the time.
Baldwin's decision to build the castle threw down the gauntlet to the Muslim world. Their response sealed the fate of these 6 men. The unusual resting place of the second skeleton examined begins to unlock the sequence of events.
Unlike the others, his body wasn't flung without any ceremony to one side, but looks very much as if it was laid to rest formally.
The proper burial of this man means he must have died before the frenzied day of battle, and is a clue to his identity.
This is his collarbone. This is a collarbone from one of the other Jacob's Ford warriors. If we just compare the two, you can see the size difference quite clearly. This was a very big man.
His body was also very muscular.
If we look at his humerus, that's his upper arm, you can see that it's very strong development of muscle attachment sites. We can see this very large area of swelling. And when muscles attach into the bone, and then that muscle is used over and over again, it'll cause the bone to grow more.
The man's skeleton is almost fully intact. But there's no sign of the combat injuries to be expected on a stricken fighter's body.
In fact, even more mysteriously, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of any healed injuries either.
Only one part of this man's skeleton hasn't yet been examined: his skull.
When they excavated and lifted it off the ground, the back of the skull broke into many pieces. So in order to find out how he died, we need to reconstruct that skull.
The shattered skull is made up of more than 100 pieces. Each piece is meticulously cleaned and glued together. When the gaps are filled with wax, the jigsaw is complete.
Well, this is even more mysterious. There is this area here at the base of the skull where we've got a semicircular fracture and a radiating fracture leading away from it. But again, there's no impact point here.
The damage to the skull was not caused by a violent blow, but most likely by the wear and tear of being buried for 800 years. With no combat injuries anywhere on his body, this man is an unlikely warrior. Another clue offers a different explanation to his identity.
He's got very strong development where ligaments hold your collarbone in towards the neck muscles. This suggests a rotary movement of the shoulders. He was using both his arms, movements in this direction, perhaps lifting weights as well.
This insight suggests he was one of the castle's most valued non-combatants. A stonemason. Medieval stonemasons served an arduous 7-year apprenticeship to master their craft. Skills essential for castle building. When the Muslim army first attacked Jacob's Ford, the outer walls of the castle were still under construction.
Everybody was caught by surprise. I mean, this group of workmen were not given any warning. You find the arrowheads amongst the tools and in the cement that they were mixing in order to build the core of the wall. They're just everywhere. I would think that in order to protect yourself, you would take your hoe, your pick, whatever you were working with, and try and defend yourself with it.
Hurry, come on! Come on!
The evidence confirms the preemptive strike on the incomplete defences, and that the first victims were unarmed craftsmen. The stonemason most likely died from an arrow wound to soft tissue. Without antibiotics, infection of the wound would have followed swiftly.
If you have a deep arrow wound and you can't get all of the arrow out, it would have been a very long, slow, painful death. You may have even taken about 3 days to die.
As the stonemason's life ebbed away, the Muslim army laid siege to Jacob's Ford. The chronicles say the plain overflowed with troops. The outer walls were never completed. Within the castle itself, the Crusaders buried their dead. The fate of Jacob's Ford was now in the hands of the great Muslim leader, Saladin.
Saladin was incredibly charismatic, and he's also extremely tough. He's determined to destroy Jacob's Ford. It's been built in his lands. He needs to attack this place before it's finished. He's got to hit it hard before it gets too powerful, too complete.
On the 6th day of the siege, Saladin executed his devastating plan. His engineers had dug a tunnel under the castle's completed inner walls.
The tunnels were not intended to let the soldiers, the Muslim soldiers, in, but to make the walls collapse.
For the men trapped inside the castle, the last hope was the reinforcements King Baldwin was mustering to relieve them. For Saladin, it was a race against the clock.
Time was short. Saladin is pushing his men to finish it as fast as possible.
To bring down the castle walls, Saladin's engineers would burn away the tunnel's wooden props.
Man the wall.
When all the burning materials will be consumed, the wall will collapse.
To ignite the timbers, they most likely used naphtha, an early form of petrol.
This is the only part along the walls where the walls are missing. Here, I believe, the tunnel was dug and the walls came tumbling down.
The Muslim chronicles describe the moment.
The wall crumbled. The current of air which penetrated at that moment spread the fire. Several combatants were prey to the flames. Imad ad-Din.
Steady now!
Saladin's troops swarmed through the breach. The Battle of Jacob's Ford would now be decided in just a few hours of savage hand-to-hand combat.
It was desperate. The only chance for the besieged, for the defenders to survive, is to keep the Muslims outside.
The Crusaders retreated.
Come on, hurry up!
Building improvised defences to buy precious time for a relief army to rescue them.
What you can see here is the actual makeshift wall that we discovered. People who were here knew that if they succeed in gaining 2, 3, 4 more hours, that's the difference between life and death.
The Muslim onslaught continued. This skeleton has a single serious injury.
This is actually a beautiful, if you can use such an adjective for something as brutal as this, sharp force trauma injury that's cut right through the top of the shoulder and down into the arm. We can see this bone here, and a blow has come down here and cut right through the bone there. The sword's been used. It's on the anterior, that's the front part of the humerus. Means that he's facing his enemy, he's in hand-to-hand combat.
Surprisingly, for a powerful sword blow, the bone is largely intact.
Now, one reason for that may be he was wearing armour, and the chainmail armour actually took a lot of the force of the blow.
If this man wore chainmail, it suggests he was most likely a Templar sergeant.
Man the wall.
At least 3 of these men, from lower class backgrounds, served each Templar knight.
Take the horses! Go, go, take them!
They wore black robes over chainmail, tended the knight's horses, and fought by his side.
The Templar sergeants are an integral part of the Knights' fighting force. These men take the full vows of a Templar and are just as battle-hardened.
Templar sergeants were professional soldiers, skilled in the arts of intense combat.
When you have the press of battle, you've got bodies upon bodies pressing on you, you're in a very restricted area. Here, I'd use the pommel. Here, driving the quillions into the face. Here, in with the head. Remember, I'll be wearing a helmet. Here, kick into the belly, follow through with a cut. If you can't fight with the close quarter combat, then you're only half a swordsman.
At the Battle of Jacob's Ford, this Templar sergeant met his match. The blow which downed him was a medieval classic.
In many medieval battles, they have found a large number of wounds to the left side of the body. The majority of people were right-handed, and when they executed a downward blow, most of them would be to the left side of the body. This would be a terrifically painful injury.
With his shield arm disabled, the sergeant's fate was sealed. Unlike the Templar sergeant, many of the other Crusaders trapped in the castle were not experienced soldiers. The next skeleton examined reveals how they battled to survive. In the final hours of the battle, Saladin's army pushed further into the castle. The Crusaders, penned in with no escape, tried but failed to stem the tide.
This person was found splayed out on the ground, one arm flung out. There's a dead mule lying on top of his arm. And these are his remains. This is his sacrum. This is the bone right at the end of the spine. It's made up of individual vertebrae which have fused together. But there's this little gap here which shows that this hasn't actually quite completed fusing. That tells us that it's probably an individual between the age of 18 to 25.
Despite this man's youth, there was something wrong with his spine.
If we look at these individual vertebrae, we can see on many of them this hole. Now that wouldn't be there normally.
Holes like this are caused by the constant carrying of heavy weights, which impacts on the spine.
Soft tissue between the vertebral bodies gets squashed down, and as it gets squashed down, it ruptures, and it causes this herniation effect in the vertebra. So this is somebody who's been carrying heavy materials, equipment, weights of one kind or another for quite a long time, probably since he was a young boy.
It's evidence of a man born of low status. More clues supporting this theory come from his teeth.
He's lost a tooth here. There's also tooth decay here. A massive hole just there. That would have been extremely painful. He's also got a huge build-up of tartar. There's all this material you can see around here, just at the end of the teeth, towards the gum line. That means that he's had gum disease. As a result of that, he would have had extreme jungle breath.
The appalling condition of his teeth and gums make him an unlikely soldier.
Would you want a warrior, to be suffering from awful toothache? Oh, leave me alone, I've got toothache. If warriors were suffering from toothache, they'd pull the tooth out so that the guy can go and do the business.
All the forensics suggest this crusader was a poor man, employed as a labourer. He had no armour, no weapons, and knew little about fighting. But when the wall came down, even a young labourer with bad teeth found himself in the front line.
A medieval army is not just about knights. The bulk of people are there as part-timers. They're not professional soldiers. They are required every so often to give some military service. It must have been absolutely terrifying. These are not men of war. People from all levels of society signed up for the crusade. You've got knights, you've got churchmen, peasants. They're a small group of Western Europeans who come over and conquered effectively an alien territory. At times of invasion, everybody is going to have to get involved.
Unskilled fighters were no match for Saladin's crack troops.
I don't think that the Muslim forces of Saladin differentiated between warriors, those who were carpenters, blacksmiths, masons. They just went through and killed whoever was in their way.
There comes a point in every struggle where it breaks down to sort of 2 or 3 against 1. It's a truly hellish scene. Knowing that you have no way out. You are absolutely pinned.
There are no injuries on the young labourer's skeleton, indicating he died from a flesh wound. The trail of dead crusaders from all ranks and classes confirms the stark account of the chronicles. The battle had turned into a massacre. This man was found with appalling head injuries.
A blade has gone into the back of the skull, and then it's lifted a slice of cranial bone away. There was a blow to the left rear side of the skull, taking away a huge slice of bone, exposing some of the brainy matter underneath. And then another blow to the top of the skull here, lifting this piece of bone away. This attack was particularly brutal, merciless, frenzied, with no quarter given.
Why one man should be the target of such violence might be explained by unusual abrasion marks on his teeth.
We can see here that this central incisor has been worn down to about half the size that it would normally be. And because of the amount of wear there, then we can imagine that there's some object being pushed backwards and forwards between the teeth.
It's a physical signature suggesting a specialized fighter.
He could be working some bowstrings, perhaps. He may be using that tooth to strip away the bark of wooden arrow shafts. He might be working feathers with his teeth.
It's convincing evidence that this man was an archer. Crusader archers typically came from ordinary backgrounds and trained from childhood to become deadly marksmen. They could fire 8 arrows a minute and hit a target up to 300 meters away. Their lethal accuracy ensured an enemy's wrath.
In the final stages of the battle, I suspect many of them were simply butchered by the Muslims. The ferocity, the fervour of war at that moment means that the chances of them pausing and taking prisoners were quite low.
You can imagine a frenzy of blows, whack, 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 on the back of the skull. They wanted to make sure this guy was dead.
As the massacre unfolded, his trapped comrades still had one extraordinary card to play. More bones recovered from the site suggest they responded with an act so brave it verged on insanity. In the final stage of the Battle of Jacob's Ford, only a few Crusaders were left standing, trapped at the south end of the castle.
They locked themselves behind the barricades, behind the makeshift walls, and they tried to defend themselves.
The bones excavated from the castle ruins offer a chilling insight into the fate of these men.
This is a very enigmatic skeleton. In the corner of his right arm and elbow, there was this object here, a mass of coins, very likely held together in a purse.
The coins are the first clue to who this man was.
We can say that he was of a relatively high status because he is holding a tremendous amount of money. I mean, this is not small pocket money that any laborer, carpenter, blacksmith would have in his pocket.
His cause of death confirms this was no ordinary crusader. It reveals that Saladin's men singled him out for special treatment.
The North Wall! They've breached the North Wall!
When these stones were lifted, they looked very carefully for any small fragments of skull, and they weren't there. So what does appear to have killed him is the fact that he lost his head.
Decapitation suggests execution. Further proof that he was a high-ranking Templar knight, and one entrusted with money to pay the castle workforce. His skeleton tells the story of his final moments. The first blow hit his right shoulder blade.
The injury is just along here. He's had a slice cut out of that. And you can see that cut here very clearly. A really nice little wedge of bone that's just been chipped out.
The next injury was to his right arm.
He's taken a chunk out of his radius at this angle here, coming down close to his wrist.
A blow to the back of the wrist, here, would have the effect of dividing the extensor tendons not only to the wrist but to the fingers. The wrist drops and you can no longer grip whatever you had in the hand.
A third injury damaged his right collarbone.
You can see here, it's very clear cut. It's triangular in shape, and that mimics the shape of the metal arrowheads. He was struck by an arrowhead, which then passed just underneath the collarbone. So it's come in at an angle here and just passed underneath. It was probably lodged in to his shoulder joint. He may have just broken the shaft off and carried on fighting.
Immobilized, the high-ranking Templar Knight was at the mercy of his assailants. It's not just human bones that throw new light on the last moments of the battle.
We found 3 horses, like this one here, you see a femur. Most of the skeletons we found with arrowheads between the bones, especially between the ribs and near the pelvis.
The arrowheads prove the horses died in battle, shot down by Saladin's archers.
At Jacob's Ford, we found peculiar kite-shaped arrowheads. They're used mainly for hunting large game, and they were used in the battlefield against horses.
The use of anti-horse arrows gives weight to an extraordinary story in the Muslim chronicles. They say the castle commander responded to the massacre of his men with an act of stunning bravery.
In the desperation of closing stages of the battle, it's quite possible a number of the knights tried to break out. A final death and glory charge against the Muslims encapsulates the motivation of the Templars, their determination, some might say fanaticism.
The large kite-shaped arrows would have been devastating. These things usually had a radius of about 3 to 5 centimeters, and it would be like throwing an axe at someone.
But although heroic, the commander's horse charge was an act of desperation.
You know that he's going to be killed. It was a suicide act. The commander of the castle knows that he's going to be humiliated, tortured, and killed.
The chronicles say
he threw himself into a hole full of fire, and from this brazier he was immediately thrown into another, that of hell. Al-Fadil.
I tend to ask myself if what the commander of the Templars did is an act of bravery or act of cowardice, because When he killed himself, when he committed suicide, he left the whole army without a commander.
The final Muslim onslaught was ruthless and methodical. Pig skeletons found littered with arrows suggest Saladin's men killed them, because in Muslim eyes, pigs are unclean. In a final act of humiliation, pig and crusader corpses were thrown together. With the killing over, the looting started. Mutilated hoof bones reveal how the victors hacked off horseshoes to gather valuable iron. The chronicles also record that the battle was followed by mass executions. It is perhaps now that the high-ranking Templar Knight meets his end.
Executions after a battle send a number of messages to the enemy. They show that you have triumphed over them. You are showing no quarter, no mercy. This is what will happen if you resist us.
The decapitation of this crusader is graphic proof of the human price paid for the ideals of holy war. News of the massacre reached King Baldwin just hours before his relief army was ready to march. He knew many of the crusaders who died personally. Today, their bones bear the marks of a crushing defeat which changed history.
For Baldwin IV, it's a terrible blow, a reduction in his prestige and in his military strength. It allows Saladin to increase the pressure on the Christian lands, pressure that will grow and grow, and in 1187 allow the Muslims to recover Jerusalem.
The Crusaders would never again regain their hold on the Holy Land.
The contents of a gruesome grave in Japan with thousands of skeletons could unlock the mysteries of the samurai next Sunday at 8. Next tonight, some of over 3,000 who lost a parent in the Twin Towers, children of 9/11.